Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Rosen Rogues, and today we're making infinitely long simulations. This is great for rocket trails, or if you have a train with smoke coming out of the top, any sort of simulation that's going to be bigger than your bounding box allows. I discovered this technique while trying to figure out how to make dust trails for cars and motorcycles driving off-road. Once it finally fell into place and I'd worked for a couple weeks on this project file, I thought, well, I should turn it into something that more people can use, and I've created our first product, essentially, which is dust trails and burnouts. I didn't want to just upload this complicated preset and leave you guys floundering to figure it out, because it's a pretty complex file, but it works really, really well and is very versatile. So what I decided to do is really work to refine it. I've annotated the entire project file, adding in commentary and listing out what does what and where to plug in different effects to make sure it works with your own custom model. I've also recorded over an hour of training material to show you guys how to use every aspect of this project and get the results that you want. I also recorded a bonus tutorial in order to show you guys how to make burnouts using the same project file. So it's not just good for dust trails, but also burnouts, as well as many other effects you might want to make with car tires or trails coming off of an object. Because I want you to be able to keep using this project file and tweaking it to get different results. But this also means that it needs to be supported long-term. So I'm giving you the guarantee right now that as long as Royals and Rogues exists and as long as Django FX exists, I'll be updating this project file with each major Embergen update. So once Embergen comes out with Embergen 2.0, this will still work. I can't go through and update every single one I've built so far, but this I consider an actual product, and I'm going to be supporting it for the long term. The last thing I'm offering with this project file is tech support. So if you're having trouble getting something to work right, or you're not getting the results that you were hoping out of this project file, hit me up on Discord and I'll make sure to work with you to get the results you need. You should be able to download this project file and get up and running in a day as opposed to the weeks it took me to build it initially. The last thing I want to do is say thank you. Thank you for being a part of the YouTube channel. It only exists because of you, because you guys want this info. You guys enjoy learning. So just use the code THANKYOU, all one word, and you'll get $10 off the project, making it significantly cheaper. So with all that out of the way, let's jump back into the tutorial. So like usual, we're actually going to start in another program, which is whatever your 3D program of choice is. This can be Blender, this can be Cinema 4D, whatever you're comfortable in, even Unreal Engine. As you can see here, I have this little rocket, and it flies across the spline and ends up over here. And if you've been doing simulations for a while, you know the problem with this, and that's quite a long area to cover with a simulation. What we're going to need to get started here is a emitter, which in our case is this little cone shape, and our rocket shape. I'm also going to include our camera that's linked to our shape and show you how to bring all these in and make them all work together. So let's select everything we want to export and go up to File, Export, and then Alembic. And FBX should work as well. So now that we have our model exported, let's jump into Embergen, and this is the default scene, which is where we're going to start. First things first is let's get rid of this shape, and we're going to get rid of the particles for now because I won't be using it this time. Let's now import our own shape by just dragging out from the emitter node and clicking import. You can also right click and then type in import and you'll get that as well. We're then going to select our file and the location that we saved it to. And hit play. It is way too big. Right away, this is causing problems. So what we're going to need to do is shrink this down. We can simply come down here to master scale and drop this to like 0.1. So that's more reasonable. Let's set this up so it's not lighting the entire rocket on fire. So instead of geometry, we're going to plug in a mask. So we go to our mask, we have all the different shapes that we exported in our project file. And here I can choose emitter shape for mask 1, and for mask 2, we're going to choose collider shape. The next thing we should do is go to control, and then select whatever we want to be able to control objects and forces in Embergen with. So that's again going to be our collider shape and our emitter shape. And if you notice, we have a few extra outputs now. We've already talked about how our first mask is going to be our emitter, so we'll connect that to our emission. And now just that part is lighting on fire. The next thing we're going to want to do is make our second mask a collider. And we can just drag out and then choose collider. And then that can go in to our simulation. Great, now we have our collider and we have our emitter. The next thing we're going to look at though is these other two, which is transform and our camera shape. So we can take our camera shape and drag out from there and create a camera. And now when I click on it, it matches the camera from our 3D file, which is great. This makes it a lot easier to follow our rocket as it travels off screen. The next thing we're going to do is drag out from transform and go all the way over to our export. This will make sure everything lines up when we export our VDB. Again, we're not using particles, so I'm just going to delete that to keep it simple. So now that we kind of got this set up the way we need to, you can already see the problem, and that's that our domain isn't nearly big enough to cover this movement. And normally what you do is say, okay, well, let's just make this a little bigger. Make it a lot bigger in Y, because that's this dimension, and see how that goes. We'll crank it up to almost 500. And playing, see, like, look, that's covering a little bit more space, and then it's already moved out again. And you can kind of see where this problem is. If you have a train or anything else continuing to make smoke for a long amount of time, or a car driving down the side of a road, this is not going to work. So I'm going to turn off our skybox and our ground so we can just see our rocket a little better. So how are we going to fix this? Well, we're going to use import controls. So how you're going to do this is if you go to your simulation and domain, and you'll notice this import control checkbox. And if you check that, now it opens up all these little settings as well as a new input. And that input is import control. And you can choose what you want from that control setting we used earlier to control the position of this element. And so we're going to connect this to our emitter shape. And now it's putting it right at the trail. And that's because we have it here at 0 position on Z, and it's at min. So you can turn that to center, and it's going to move it to the center. And then we can look at Y and change it to max or min to get on the right side of Y. So there we have it. It's a little bit too close probably though, so we're just going to push it a little bit in. So this position though is relative to whatever you've linked it to. So it's going to stay that far away from it the whole time. You'll notice we have inherent rotation and scale as well as position. You want to be careful with those. If something's moving around weird or shifting, it might be because you have these settings checked. So you can turn these off if you don't want it inheriting the rotation, for instance. Something to note though is that the domain won't actually rotate around, since it always has to be this sort of square shape. It will just sort of shift in relation to your object. So I usually uncheck inherent rotation anyway. However, for other objects, you might want that. So let's look at what else we can do to help this out. Okay, so now that our domain is following our shape, let's figure out how to make this look a little bit more like a rocket. So first things first is we're going to grab a force and a force line. And this is just going to push our simulation in a certain direction. Now, again, we're going to go to our transform and find that import control. Click that. And now we have our new input. We can then use that to connect to our emitter shape again and see where it's going. And so now that's pushing backwards. And if I turn up, if I go back to general and I push up and I turn up our push strength, we should start getting a little bit more of a rocket trail. Okay, there we go. Now it's starting to actually come out the back a little bit. We'll probably need to check out our emitter settings as well. So first off, let's look at our fuel rate. Pretty low for this rocket. So let's turn up our fuel to get a lot more. Maybe even max it out. There we go. Next thing I'm going to do is turn up our smoke rate. We get a lot more smoke. And I'm just maxing these out for now because I don't exactly care too much about our settings. I'm just trying to get this to look good. Another thing to look at if you're getting weird interactions like this is perhaps your collision settings are wrong. So if I go to simulation over here in our imported model, you can see the thickness of our models here. So I can turn down the thickness of the collision as low as possible, and I can turn up our thickness of our emission a little higher or a little lower. There we go. That's kind of a cool effect we're starting to get there. So another problem we might have with this is our collider, it looks like. So our collider currently is transferring its velocity to our simulation, and that means that it's pulling everything along with it in the direction it's traveling. And this rocket's moving pretty fast in this direction, so it's sort of forcing everything to stay inside this little area. So if we drop this down, we might start getting a, yep, there we go. We're getting a little bit more of a smoke trail as I drop this down. And now I can probably turn our push line down a little bit more. That's not so crazy. However, right now, this smoke is really wispy and it's just flying off the side. And I don't really want that. So let's go to our simulation and let's go to dissipation and turn up our velocity dissipation. What this is going to do is sort of freeze the smoke after it comes out. Let's try to make this look a little better. Now you'll notice we're getting this stepping, and that's because we don't have our time step up high enough. So if we go to time control and we go to time step, it's at 60. And currently our simulation here is running at 30. And that just means that essentially for every frame, this has 2 opportunities to calculate where everything should be. And if you're getting this sort of effect, it usually means you just need to turn your time step up. So if I make this 90, for instance, and I hit play, you'll notice it starts to smooth out a little bit. And I can click on our camera so we can just sort of follow this a little easier. And I can hit B to get rid of the bounding box. And now you're noticing this is getting a little better. But we might still get some more. And if that's the case, we just need to turn that up one more time to 120. Now, if you do this, you're going to have to take note of how much you've times this by. And you notice I've gone from 60 to 90 to 120. That's because those are all multiples of 30. So I've multiplied this now 4 times. And when I go to export, I'm just going to have to change this to 4. And that's something to keep in mind. You can see this really easily if I make the frame number the same number of frames as my imported model. So if I look down here, it says 181. Okay, so then this should also be 181. And if I look at my timeline now, they line up. If I make my frame stride 1, though, it's a 4th as long. So that's a good way to double check and make sure everything's lining up, is make your number of frames the same as your animation, and then check them against each other by using your frame stride to make sure they're the same length. So now we have that. This is a very smooth simulation now. However, I don't really want it to be smooth. I want it to be a rocket. And so how we're going to do that is by changing a few other settings. So let's fix that. Let's go to our simulation. And let's go to our dissipation and our diffusion and our vorticity. So first, let's turn up our vorticity a lot to make this way more curly and a little more chaotic. There we go. Starting to feel a little better, but it's still just flying away as soon as it comes out. And we don't really want that. We do want it getting pushed back, but we don't want it flying away forever. And one of the ways we can fix this is with our dissipation. So we can come here and go to velocity dissipation. What this is going to do is slowly slow down the smoke the longer it exists. So we can kind of crank this as high as we need, where it's still coming out and not just all hanging out right here, but then sort of stops flying off screen after a little bit. This feels pretty good. The issue is it's still getting cut off at the end here. Now, there's a few things you can do, and this is going to depend on your RAM. As you notice, we're only using up under half of my RAM, and so I can actually extend this box quite a bit. So if I go to our domain again, I can probably make it a little shorter on the top and bottom with Z, maybe like 150 here, and that buys me more voxels. And then what I can do is add them to Y, and if I hit update here, now you'll notice we have a lot longer trail to play with. However, depending on your simulation, this may or may not work, right? You might have this turning a corner, it might need to move a little bit more, and you might still run out of space. And this is where you're going to need to know what your shot is. Obviously, if your shot's really far away, you can simply make your rocket smaller, or your train smaller, or whatever your emitter is smaller, and that will fit a lot more into your domain. And it won't really matter that your sim is small because you won't be able to see all the details. However, if you're going to be in a mid-range, sort of like this, then all you really need to know is where does your simulation end, right? Where does your camera? But if you're going to be in a shot more like this, sort of a mid-range shot, all you need to know is where does my scene end? What's the edge of my camera? So we go to the camera and I look at display and I make this 1920 by 1080. And it already has our field of view here imported. Now what I can do is kind of see where the edge of that line is. So this might also become more visible if I turn back on our skybox and ground. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so you can kind of see the edges of the frame now. And I know if it's out of this, then we can't see it. So really all I need is the trail lasting longer than that. However, let's say you need this to be even longer. Let's say you want, yeah, I'm only going to see so much of it, but I really want to just be able to follow this along in its full glory and not see it get chopped off at the end here, right? Not have this hard cutoff. Well, then what you're going to want to do is change your dissipation. We already talked about dissipating the velocity, but you can also just dissipate each effect. So if you notice, the smoke slowly starts to go away as it gets to the end, but it's still hitting that back wall. So all we need to do is turn up our smoke dissipation over here. And now you'll notice as it travels, it's going to dissipate a lot sooner. Now, that might be too soon or might not look the way you want. It's just sort of fading off. The other type of dissipation we have, reset this down lower here to like 25, is this other dissipation. So this one is going to just slowly fade it off, is how you can think about it. This one, on the other hand, is removing smoke. So it's sort of a different approach, but I can just demonstrate this by turning it up and you'll see. So rather than fading it off necessarily, I turn this one over here, it's going to sort of cut away at the smoke. So as it gets older, you're going to start to notice it dying, but a little more chaotic manner. And so there's just two methods of doing the same thing. And you can see it's a little more chaotic versus if I drop this down and turn up our multiplicative dissipation as opposed to our subtractive, it's going to fade off a little bit smoother. So just play with that what you want, and you can dial it in based on your memory requirements. So like I said, right now I can make this way longer if I wanted to, using my VRAM here. But eventually I'm going to hit a limit. And when I do, that's where I'm going to want to have this start dissipating off before the end. And that's sort of the balance you're just going to have to play between those two settings, the size of your domain and how long you want the smoke on. And so then you can also change your flame or your fuel dissipation, and sort of craft this to be what you need it to be. I've been messing around a little bit, changing some settings, and the project file, as always, will be included on my Gumroad. But the last thing you might want to do before you finish with a file like this is come over to your projection and simulation tabs and just look at the quality settings. And you can check your prevent overshoots and prevent your velocity and voxel overshoots. That's usually if you have something like in a tube or flowing through a pipe, but you can see if it helps out with your simulations as well. The other thing is looking at your projection method, and what we can do is turn this up to accurate, and it's going to start getting a lot more accurate. Obviously, it's going to take a little more resources, but it might be worth it, and I can even change it up to extreme, and now you're going to start getting a really good looking simulation. So if you're trying to get something to look right or move through a hole or something, and it's not quite doing what you think it should be doing, that's a way of doing that. And so now you can see we're getting this nice smoke coming off the sides. It's coming out the back. It's looking very rocket-like. This is sort of what we want. And you can also see if I hit B, I'm going to turn on our bounding box again. It's all billowing out, building up this nice trail, but that trail's dissipating right before we get to the end. Or is it? Well, we might need to tweak our settings just a little bit more or extend it. We still have plenty of VRAM, so what we can go is back to our domain. I can make this past this amount here. We can do like 900. And now if I recalculate, you'll notice we've used more VRAM. However, we also have a lot more space to play with. So that's more or less it. That's how you make a really cool rocket effect or any sort of effect. Again, this could be a train, this could be a car, and it's just billowing out from the back and continuing on for a good long while until it reaches the end of your domain. So you're going to have to play with that and your dissipation and get that just right for you. So that way this is lasting long enough to give you a nice long trail, but not hitting the edge of your domain. Let's try this last one here. Let's see if I got the ratio right. There you have it. There it is. So it's lasting plenty long, but it's dying out before it hits the edge. And we can just keep doing that infinitely, which is exactly what we want. From there, it's as simple as making sure your transform is connected, double checking your frame stride like we talked about earlier, and then just exporting. I guess one last fun little thing you can do here is if you want to see the fuel, right? It says rocket fuel. You can just go up to your shading, check fuel, change your density scale, and there you go. That's your nice blue rocket fuel. You can see kind of coming off the end there. And you can export that the same way, just by checking fuel, and just use that as a light source like you would flames. So there you have it. That's how you create a infinitely long sim in Embergen. Now, Embergen 2.0 will have sparse, and what this is going to do is make it so you don't have to do this. But until that comes out, this is sort of the solution. I really hope this video helps you out. Again, check out all the project files on our Gumroad for free. The link will be down below. Have fun making rocket trails, smoke trails, choo-choo trains, whatever you want, and I'll see you in the next one.